Welcome to I Could Never, a podcast about non-monogamy and the many ways it can look. I'm Genevieve from Polyamory on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and partner, Ishik.
Yeah, just your classic boy next door. I'm Ishik. How's it going? But today I am super excited to welcome also Kevin Patterson. He is an author, educator, and all-around rad dad. He wrote Love's Not Colorblind, Confronting Racism in Non-Monogamous and Kinky Spaces. He's also the co-author of the For Hire series, science fiction about polyamorous superheroes. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. But before we can get into any of that, this interview feels a lot like if there was Rayanne on your wedding day.
What? We're doing an Alanis Morissette?
It's a free ride when it's already time to vibe or vent.
For anyone listening for the first time, we always like to start off the show with a little icebreaker called Vibe or Vent, where we'll each take a beat to share a bit about something that's either really making us happy recently or something that sucks that we need to get off our chest. So, Ishik, would you like to start us off?
No.
Oh, you want me to start off? Okay. I mean, it's weird because I'm in a good mood today, but I think I'm going to vent about insomnia. I got 90 minutes of sleep last night. So if I am speaking slowly or seem a little out of it at any point, that's probably why. But it's strange because I also am in a good mood. I saw some friends. I've had good food and drink today. Like, it's a medley in the mix.
No, it can only be a vibe.
I can only be upset or happy.
Upset or happy.
Pick one. There's only a binary. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, I think I'm venting a little bit about being out of control of what our bodies choose to do and their rhythms fluctuating. Anyway, but I'd love to ask you, Kevin, do you feel like you're vibing or venting today?
I'm definitely vibing. Back in August, after like a pandemic of feeling pretty depressed and pretty burnt out, my creativity just sort of came back. I've written 3 superhero novels, the For Hire series, all 3 with my co-writer, Alana Phelan. And over the course of from August to December, I wrote a whole other book. I think it's going to end up being the best one in the series. Alana took a step back to editing this one instead of co-authoring. I think it makes the other 3 books better, and I've been on a roll, and it's been moving pretty fast, so entirely my vibe since August.
Yeah, it's the flip side of writer's block or feeling like procrastinating is when you get on that roll and you're just inspired and go.
Yeah.
It's cool that it's lasted for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's to the point where I actually have to buckle down and finish the book because every once in a while, it's like, wait a minute, I've got a whole other story idea. And then I start writing that one. So this little superhero universe that we put together back in 2018 is going to be a lot fuller by the end of 2025.
Well, looking forward to it.
Hey, that was my line.
Okay.
You don't get to say that. Now I'm venting about that.
Are you vibing or venting?
I'm actually also vibing. And I kind of almost feel like it's somewhere in between the two of you, right? Like you were talking about something that felt like really out of control in a negative way. You were Kevin, you were kind of sharing about something that's not necessarily out of control, but sort of was happening to you, this the inspiration wave.
It's pretty out of control. I accept that.
But in a good way, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so for me, I feel like what I'm actually vibing about is being more intentional about kind of structuring my energy and work time over the next couple of months. We recently just kind of worked up a whole production schedule for a bunch of the work that's going to be happening over the next few months with the podcast and with videos and stuff like that. And it really helps, honestly. Shocker, scheduling helps with time management.
What? In polyamory?
I know, it's crazy. But for my ADDS, I always dance on the edge of needing the intensity of oh my God, the deadline is 2 minutes from now. I have to get this done right now. Genevieve knows that very well.
Yeah.
And it's not always great. And so it feels really nice when I actually do have a runway to look at and then can feel, I'm checking things off the list. Again, I'm not saying something revolutionary. I think a lot of people have this experience as a very natural part of their lives, but just getting to enjoy some of that for once, you know?
Still feels good.
Anyways,
Let's get into
let's
it.
move past that. Kevin,
Yes.
we like to get started with our guest by getting a sense of the shape of their non-monogamy. So can you tell us a bit about the relationships that are close to you at the moment?
Right now, I've been with my wife. We've been married 17 years. We're going into 18 years. We've been together a little over 20 years. It's been great. We've got a couple of great kids. I've got 3 local partners that I see on a regular basis, and those relationships have lasted 5, 6, and 7 years. So those have been going pretty strong. And then I also have like several comment relationships, people who when I was doing more book tour, speaking engagement stuff, there are people who I'd only get to see 2, 3 times a year at one conference or another. And those are still people who are like very close and very dear to me. We still talk all the time.
That's awesome.
You mentioned that you've been with your wife for over 20 years. Have you been non-monogamous the whole time, or has there been a change?
Just about the whole time. Like in the first few months of our relationship, a relationship that I assumed would have been monogamous, we ended up finding ourselves in a threesome that changed our perspective on how much exclusivity did or didn't matter to us. What I expected was for it to like destroy the relationship because that's all the representation that I've ever gotten. That like if you do anything that's a little bit not monocentric, not heteronormative, that everything goes to the wayside. That wasn't our experience. So once we got into this situation where we were no longer strictly tied to monogamy, we were like, well, what else is fake? Whatever messages have we gotten by way of pop culture or modeling from our parents, or what else doesn't apply to us? And it ended up letting us sort of redraw our relationships more around our own needs and around sort of societal expectation.
Mhm.
At which point I started reading all the books, listening to all the podcasts, and like trying my best to avoid rookie mistakes, which didn't always work out so great.
What were some of the rookie mistakes, if you remember?
Um, Really early on, I ended up hooking up with a friend, and it was a friend that my wife and I both knew from college. And my friend immediately was like, I've just ruined your relationship. Oh my God, what have I done wrong? Please don't tell your wife. And she was my girlfriend at the time, and she starts crying, and I made the decision, the bad decision, to not say anything, and that only lasted like maybe a week or two. I don't remember how much time, but it wasn't a lot of time. And eventually I told my wife, like, hey, look, when I took that trip and I saw that friend, this is a hookup that happened. And my wife was like, yeah, I figured that was a hookup that was going to happen. And I thought it was weird when you came home without a story.
Hmm.
Thankfully, things were able to sort out. Like I called that friend and I said, hey, look, I know I told you I wasn't going to talk, I wasn't going to reveal this secret, but it never should have been a secret in the first place. It was one of my first lessons that just being honest and respectful and forthright with your communication is going to solve the problem. Even if the solution is y'all can't be together anymore. Just being honest, you're going to get a better outcome. You don't have to sit around holding on to lies that you've got to figure out ways to retell and reshape depending on the situation. Honesty comes in one flavor. And if you use that, the problem sorts out faster than otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it can be really helpful to hear people who've been successfully doing polyamory for so long also talk about the times that they've struggled or mistakes that they've made. I think it can really demystify, the whole like, how do we do this and enjoy it thing. Were there any struggles for you along the way that come to mind, struggles that I think might be common pitfalls for anyone?
We had a lot of ideas. We had a lot of high-minded ideas, and a lot of people do. And you see them get burnt out in comment sections of message boards. They're like, "This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to function." And then they meet real people and realize that like all of those rules go out the door when you're actually having to deal with human beings. A thing that popped up a bunch on my wife's end was she would say something like, all right, well, I only want to go out at certain times. Like we've got a couple of kids, only when the kids are in bed, then we can go out and do other things. And I'd be like, okay, cool, cool, cool. And I didn't have any partners at the time. Sure. And then one day it would be like, all right, well, my date starts a little earlier than that, so I'm going to leave a little bit early. Do you mind making sure the kids get to bed and the kids are taken care of? Yeah, sure. And then it would be like, all right, well, my date actually, we're going to a movie. There's an event. It's timed. Would you mind if I just didn't come home from work tonight and went straight on to my date? And I'd be like, yeah, sure. No big deal. I got it covered. And then I would want to do that. And my wife would be like, but we had a deal.
Oh.
We made an agreement that we were waiting until the kids go to bed. And I'm like, okay, but you've been breaking that agreement for 6 months. Can we talk over how necessary this agreement even is, and how we can both let our relationships do their thing? Is this rule even necessary? And there were a bunch of things that my wife would come up with at the time, because like to protect her mental health, to protect her well-being, to protect whatever she needed to protect. And then she would be the one to violate it for several months. And because I didn't have anyone in my life that was that serious, I didn't care. But then when I did have somebody who I had to make those same choices with, all of a sudden it would come into question, and my wife and I would have to have a long conversation about that.
Yeah.
For people who have that happening, you being on the end as the one who was like very okay with the rule getting bended, but then being kind of blindsided by there not being that same bending for you, how did you find it best to like challenge that? Because I think it's a pretty hard thing for some people to challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Because like a lot of it does feel like a me versus them sort of thing. And just making sure that you don't approach it as me versus them and more like us versus the problem, that was always really useful. And then the mantra that I would always use, and it was something I'd use all the time, and it's something thankfully, I don't have to use as much, was this isn't about me. Because there would be times, where, maybe my wife is caught up in NRE and she's feeling some sort, and she's, overly investing in somebody and like being a little bit lax about what's going on at home. Well, this isn't about me. She's going through her own thing. We can have a conversation about it. I can tell her how I feel, but she's not doing this to me. She's just, excited about something new that's come into her life. She's excited about someone new. Just knowing not to take it personally and approaching it in a non-accusatory way, like, hey, like this is a thing that's happening. This is the impact of the thing that's happening. I'm not telling you to not be interested in whoever you're interested in, but also understand that other things are going on around you. Approaching it that way went a lot further. Like I've seen people getting really uppity about making it a personal problem. And sometimes it does need to be approached that way, but other times it's like, they're not trying to harm you. Like you and your partner have conflict, but not because they're specifically trying to harm you. Like just approaching it that way was really useful.
I wanted to just get a quick follow-up. You mentioned NRE. For any listeners who aren't familiar with the term, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, NRE as in new relationship energy, the honeymoon phase. That time when you're all glowy and happy and buzzy about being with somebody brand new. And sometimes you can get caught up in that energy. Like, I love that energy. Some people get really broken up about it and hate it, but I actually love it. Like, I love walking around and singing and thinking about the person that I'm all charged up over. That doesn't work for everybody. Sometimes that energy can become chaotic to the point where it's destabilizing to the other people who are already in your life.
So if somebody wants to have a conversation, let's say they're in that position, they want to have a conversation, not a conflict. What does that conversation look like if you're feeling slighted while they're swooning on someone else?
I mean, sometimes it's just saying it out loud. Like, I see that you're really into this person, and I like it, and I appreciate it. But at the same time, that's impacting me in this particular way. Whatever you decide to do is whatever you decide to do, but understand that that's where I'm at right now. In a way that doesn't restrict your partner's autonomy, just letting them know, like, hey, I am in a place where this is impacting me. And then whatever they do, that's the information that you get. Like if they decide like, okay, now that you've told me this, I'm going to tell you to fuck off. That's information that you can use. If they hear you and they're like, oh, well, I didn't realize it was impacting you this way. I can make some tweaks to the way I'm relating to this person so that I'm not losing you at the same time. That's information you get. That tells you about the kind of effort, that kind of tells you about the kind of commitment that you got with this person. Or it might tell you that you don't have those things. And then it might be time to move on. But just, I'm not big into throwing around a lot of blame if it can be avoided. I'm not big into like making heroes and villains out of every relationship. Like, yeah, sometimes that shit really does exist. Sometimes people are just really terrible or really terrible to you, or just really terrible for you. That's just not really my go-to as to, well, this person isn't suiting my needs, so they're wrong or evil or being intentionally cruel to me, I don't really like doing it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to learn a little bit more, bringing it back to your relationships. I was thinking about, so we talked about all of your present day connections. Sometimes people ask, like, what's a week to week like? So having multiple long-term relationships, a wife and kids, like for people who can't imagine the dailiness of that, can you give us a picture of like what your routine on an average month is?
It runs pretty much like a well-oiled machine most of the time. My three local partners, they each have a day. We alternate between whether they come to see me at my home or I go to see them at theirs. My wife has her own partners, and if someone wants to go out, someone stays home with the kids. And we each try to be active with the kids. And then if somebody's coming over, there's a time. There's like after 6, after 7, after 8 o'clock, someone will come over. We'll have our date night, or I'll go out somewhere and I'll have my date night. And it's really a matter of like who gets to the calendar first. Like if somebody's like, "Hey, Kev, I'm going to a thing on Saturday. You want to come?" I look at the calendar. If my wife's got something going on, sorry, I can't make it. Or I've got to arrange childcare. Usually it's I can't make it because I don't feel like arranging childcare. But even the partners that I don't get to see on a regular basis, like we chat, we text. The magic of modern technology. Like when my mom and dad went to work, they would just go all day without hearing from each other. Whereas now I hear from my partners all the time. Like over the course of this conversation, I've had several text messages that I'm gonna have to respond to
No.
when we're done here. And that's okay because it means that I don't have to spend, 7 days a week, 40 hours, 40-hour weeks with each partner in order to maintain a connection. We can just send memes to each other all day until it's time to like speak on something a little bit more.
Since you started out with your wife being a girlfriend, I'm assuming there was a lot of conversation about, are we getting married? A lot of conversation leading up to having kids. Were you with other partners during those changes in your life, and how did that play out for you?
I was with other partners, but all of it was casual to the point of take it or leave it. Like we get along, we can go out, we can have a good time, but they weren't looking for anything serious, and I wasn't expecting anything serious either. And it was good while it was good, but at some point I got really tired of hearing, "This is great, but I need to find a single monogamous version of you." And that's when I started really focusing on like people who were just good letting the relationship be whatever it was without like, well, this isn't monogamous enough for the long term, or this isn't, heterosexual enough for the long term, or whatever it was, whatever the problem was. All of that went away when I started being more intentional with who I was with. And as a result, like it changed the dynamic of who I was dating. It changed the dynamic of who I was looking for. Just yeah, no more noobs. Not that there's anything wrong with noobs, but I couldn't do that anymore because it was damaging for my own self-esteem, for my own mental health.
Mm. With adding more longer term partners over time, sometimes people will say, especially if like a second partner already you had a spouse, so they accept that, but then a new partner comes in and they'll feel stress. In terms of developing additional relationships over time, was there ever, you said it was a well-oiled machine, was there ever like stress of the calendar of what will it look like now, or of the change of it?
Yeah, we're actually dealing with that now. One of my partners recently had a child, and so now we're trying to rebalance what that looks like. Like they're no longer able to come see me on our days, So now I'm going to see them, and our relationship looks different because like they're a new mom. There's always going to be some level of growing pains, just rebalancing. I think it's just a matter of understanding that there's going to be some rebalancing and approaching it in a way that's not creating like, heroes and villains out of it.
So, with so much time under your belt and having published a book about non monogamy, I'm guessing you're pretty out to everyone about polyamory.
Yeah. Like the most closeted I am, which is not very closeted at all, is my coworkers. If someone's like, "Hey Kev, what you do this weekend?" "Oh, I was hanging out with my girlfriend this weekend." "Hey Kev, what you doing this weekend?" "I was hanging out with my wife this weekend." And if someone catches on that I've said two different names, we can have that conversation. But I don't really volunteer a whole lot of my life satisfaction to the place where I get my job satisfaction.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like if they want to know more, they'll ask.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. No hard feelings.
Well, was that so being like as open as you are now, aside from at your job, was that the case before publishing, or were there any people in your life that were like surprised to learn about your non-monogamy from publishing?
No, no, no. There was a point where my wife and I were going to two different polyamory meetups in a day. It was like a Saturday. There was like a Black and polyamory meetup at one side of Philadelphia, and then later in the day there was like a different meetup somewhere else on the other side of Philadelphia. And about halfway in between those, we're stopping for lunch, and we're like, we're going to two polyamory meetups in a day here. We should probably just be out about this.
Mm.
And then we like over lunch, we both went on to Facebook and we both like listed ourselves as whatever passed for non-monogamous as Facebook official at the time. We just went ahead and did that. Our close friends already knew, but we decided to make it like an honest go of it. And that was like a decade ago and years before publishing the book.
Was that also when your family found out about your non-monogamy? How was that received by them?
My parents weren't into it, point blank. My mom is an academic. And so I tried to approach her in an academic way. Like when I explained, hey, this is what my life looks like, mom, I made sure I brought like books and TED Talks and articles and my mom was not happy to have her own methods turned against her in any way, shape, form, or fashion. She wasn't here for it. There was a point where my mom would send me articles like, couple has threesome, ends in murder. And she's like, see, Kevin? It's like, you don't want to get murdered, Kevin. You better knock it off. And my dad I don't think my dad cared one way or the other, but he's not exactly the voice of that relationship. So he wasn't going to contradict my mom about it.
Sure.
It took a long time for them to just understand, okay, Kevin's doing his own weird thing, and we're just going to have to be accepting of it or we lose a son. It took them a while to get to that point. Whereas, like, my in-laws, my wife's parents, they were all like, well, as long as y'all agree to it, as long as she gets to do the same thing you're doing, Kevin, and as long as y'all don't, ruin my grandbabies, we're fine. And that's been their take the whole time. Like, that's the take that I wish I had gotten from my parents. So after an amount of time where I was like really low contact with my folks, we started talking again, and I sat them down and said like, hey, look, this is what my life is like. This is what it's going to be like. It's been this way for long enough that y'all have had time to get used to it. So this is where we are now. And it's not like a frequent topic of conversation, but when it comes up, my mom doesn't like turn up her nose anymore when I mention I've got other people in my life that I'm not married to. So it was just time. It was time and walking away for an amount of time.
Yeah, and once it's the new normal, right? There's a acceptance that it's not a phase, I guess, or that it's not volatile. It's like, oh, this is actually stable.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, exactly.
One question that I get a lot is when people are parents, when people have kids, they're out about their non-monogamy publicly, but then there's still this question of like how and what to share with the kids, what's age appropriate and all of that. What has your experience been if you are open with your kids? How has that been navigated?
Well, I mean, we were non-monogamous before we had kids, so it didn't make any sense to try to like hide these additional humans who at that point became like more and more important part of our, important parts of our lives. Like when we first started having kids, the people in our lives weren't like central, essential pieces of our lives, but that changed after we had kids. And so it made less and less sense to hide our kids or hide our people from our kids year after year. So it just became their normal. Somebody did a spotlight on the Poly Role Models blog. I was really excited about it. And my older kid, my son, was like, okay, but why? Like, why are you in a newspaper? What are you doing that anybody cares about, Dad? And I was like, oh, well, our family's a little different. This is the way our family is different. And somebody thought that was noteworthy enough to write about. And my kid was like, all right, cool. I love our family. And then went back to playing. They couldn't have been more than like 4 years old. That ended up being the whole conversation.
I would love to ask because I have no experience as a parent, right? And I do know that there's kind of this like, I don't know, meme or whatever you want to call it about like parents talking and stuff, right? Have you ever had like any kind of negative interaction with another parent, like set of parents at like a school thing or whatever, where they throw shade or something like that? about what they might know or perceive or whatever? Anything like that ever, or nah?
Only once. Only once. One of my kids was struggling with some personal issues, and my cousin's wife, rest in peace, my cousin, said something to the effect of, "Well, do you think your kid is struggling with these personal problems because you're non-monogamous?" And like it was something like very completely unrelated, our non-monogamy and our kids' struggles. And it was coming from someone who was sort of built for conflict. So I was like,
So diplomatic.
yeah, like, so I was like, you know what? It isn't actually has nothing to do with that. And I let it roll off because I wasn't going to start a fight with someone who was going to be determined to misunderstand me.
I think that's so important. Like, if you can already tell somebody doesn't want to understand, like, if they're not curious, they've already decided, then it's a waste of energy.
Yeah, like I'm not going to sit here and have a bad faith conversation with you in front of my kids. No, we're good. Like, I love myself too much for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you got that, one example of the question around the age of 4. As your kids started getting older, did you get different questions or more specific questions as they grew up and understood the world a bit differently?
Yeah, did you have to have like a birds and the bees, but polyamorous? Polyamorous birds and bees?
Yeah.
Birds, bees, and frogs.
Thankfully, the kids understood pretty well. Like I said, it was their normal. They got used to seeing other people around the house. Were always really age appropriate. At first, it was they were young enough to sort of like corner our partners to get them to get snacks when we weren't around. They might corner someone for like an invite to a tea party. But now my kids are older now. They're teens and tweens, so they can't be bothered with what their parents are up to. They still have like love and respect for our other people. Like they get that part of it, but they're not interested. They don't care.
With your other long-term relationships, was there ever sort of a discussion of like somebody wanting to also be a co-parent? I know people do that sometimes. Or was it always just you and your wife as the parents?
Really, there was at least one point where one of my partners sort of wanted to step into the role of being sort of like a bonus parent to my kids. And it was okay until the relationship turned south. And once the relationship turned south, like I did try to make concessions, like maybe we could find a way where you can still interact with the kids, but but not in the same way with me. Or like we could find ways like it was right before our kids got their own cell phones. So like had the breakup happened a few months later, I would have been like, hey, look, if y'all want to text each other back and forth, you could do that, but just keep me out of it. But ultimately that relationship went too sour too fast in too negative of a way that it would have been feasible to like maintain a relationship between my ex and my kids. The kids eventually got over it. It was years ago, and kids are resilient, especially at that age. But it also changed the way that we sort of let people around the kids. We became sort of less receptive to bonus parents and more just bonus adults, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be somebody who's responsible enough that our kids can look to you for help, but there's only going to be 2 people making the decisions here.
Mm-hmm.
People get real pearl clutching about the whole kids thing, right? And that's just like real common sense, real basic, like what you just said. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, the only reason people get real pearl clutchy about the kids is because they're looking to be real pearl clutchy about any part of it. I've got I don't like calling it a man cave, but I got a nice little setup in my basement, and at some point my dad came over and he was like, you can't just have a room to yourself, Kevin. And I was like, maybe you can, I can. And if you can't have that room to yourself and that's something you want, that's a conversation you can have with my mom. But you're not going to come here and be like, hey, this is unreasonable if that's something that my wife and I have decided are reasonable. Sometimes people look at polyamory the same way. They're like, well, that's not something I can do with my relationship. That's not something I can do with my husband, my spouse, my wife, my partner, whatever it is. And they're like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. And let me give you a list of reasons why. And kids feels like an irrefutable reason. Like, well, clearly this is something you shouldn't be doing. And that's the reason why I don't do it, because I am a pillar of virtue.
Because you know that the people who are bitching on the internet are definitely that.
Yeah. And I don't really have the kind of time for that. I'm not hurting anybody, and I'm also not getting graded on this exam.
Yeah, it's something that I encounter is people sort of doing the perfect, like, clean room hypothetical of imagining perfect child rearing and then criticizing every possibility that could go wrong. I posted recently a video about three people legally becoming parents of a child, that they fought for all three to be on the birth certificate and so on.
Yeah.
And mostly people were happy about the expansion of family is like bonus parents or bonus adults, like the more the merrier. But there were some people that were like, this could be misused, or this could be damaging.
Slippery slopes.
Yeah.
What was particularly frustrating about that example was like, it was just the most wholesome fucking story where like the woman literally, because it was two women and a man, and like the second mom literally induced lactation to be able to also breastfeed. It was a beautiful story. It was, and they like had to fight in the courts and all this shit. It was great. They won. It was awesome. And like, for people's first thoughts to come in there and just be like, what about if a cult leader wanted to use this? And I'm like, bro, there are plenty of fucking laws that this something like fictional cult leader that you've created in your mind could use. The idea that this is the first place your brain is going, like, you clearly just wanted to have a bad day today.
Yeah.
You clearly just wanted to be upset.
Well, if you love them both, what happens if they're both hanging off of a cliff? Which one do you say?
What if you have a gun with only one bullet and a crazy person?
What happens if they want to raise a kid with 4 pigs? You know, are we gonna just let it happen?
Hey folks! Like we mentioned at the start, Kevin is not only the award-winning author of Love's Not Colorblind, he's also the author of the For Hire series of superhero novels. And he's back with the 4th book in the series, For Hire: The Price of Fame. This installment tells its own compelling standalone story, making it a great jumping on point for new readers, while returning fans will find it adds a ton of new depth and context to the whole For Hire universe. The crowdfund campaign is live now on Indiegogo and goes until April 2nd. Backers can get ebook and audiobook pre-orders, as well as signed copies of the paperback and a whole bunch more. So, if you're looking for fun polyamorous fiction, or you just want to support a polyamorous author, go check out For Hire: The Price of Fame on Indiegogo now. You, I think, have possibly, for all of our guests thus far, the longest experience with non-monogamy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Grizzled old veteran of non-monogamy. Too old for
I
this
mean,
shit.
if the shoe fits, man.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think what I would love to kind of get a sense of is being a part of the community in various ways over 2 decades. Do you feel like there have been any notable like developments or changes in behaviors or attitudes or perspectives, both like within the community and from without?
Yeah.
Over that time?
Yeah, without a doubt. There's such a change in terms of autonomy and respect, where there was a time period where if you wanted respect in your relationship, like if you were in a polyamorous relationship, you were a third to a married couple. And if you wanted to be like respected like a full partner, you would just have to go marry someone else and get your own third, you know? That was sort of the perspective of some of the books that I read early on. But that was a changing perspective even then, where now everyone is sort of doing their own thing, and like respect for autonomy, respect for freedom is one of the most paramount things. Just like, and also like respect, communication, open, you know, emotional literacy, scheduling, all that fun stuff. But just having respect for a partner who isn't like a live-in partner, who isn't like a nesting partner, who isn't a married partner. Having respect for those partnerships, that's been a huge jump in the years that I've been doing this. And then, like, I like to take a little bit of credit as well, where with Love's Not Colorblind, there's a lot more open conversations about the way identity plays out in polyamory. Like, there was definitely a period where all representation was a white guy, a probably heterosexual white guy with 2 bisexual white women. Everyone's thin and educated and well-to-do and able-bodied, you know, traditionally attractive. And there was definitely a push to get away from that singular image of non-monogamy. The dynamics are as diverse as humanity is, and Love's Not Colorblind played into that pretty directly. I like that we're getting that representation now, and I'm glad to have played my part in that.
And speaking of, for any readers who haven't read the book or aren't necessarily familiar, can you give a kind of a brief sense of some of the topics it covers and kind of how they're presented?
Yeah, yeah. So with Love's Not Colorblind, like it's discussing the way white supremacy finds its way into polyamorous spaces because it finds its way into every space, but particularly how it impacts polyamory spaces, how it plays out in ways of tokenism, how it plays out in ways of othering, in fetishization. It's all stuff that I've have at least some amount of experience with. I tell a lot of people stories in there because it's not just me. It's not just me, and I wanted people to feel not just heard but validated because of that. Like one of the most validating experiences of the process was hearing it's not just me. Like this issue that I'm dealing with is an issue that's pretty widespread. That's always been sort of the path.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful to vocalize the sneaky ways that supremacy shows its head like that. Yeah, but it's heartening to hear that, calling it out has, in your experience, seems to have an impact.
I can't speak for everyone's experience, which, and I wouldn't want to. The Philadelphia community looks very different than it did. Some of the experiences that I brought up, like, hurt some feelings, frankly enough. I'd mentioned, like, hey, I felt this way at a party, and then someone who attended that party or someone who hosted that party would be like, well, fuck that guy, you know? And I get it. Like, no one wants to hear that something they put together was a bad experience for somebody, but that's a lot less acceptable now. It's a lot less acceptable now, where now it's more like, all right, well, if someone had a bad experience, we're at least willing to listen about why that experience was bad and see if we can make something better the next time. Maybe the answer is still fuck that guy, but it's fuck that guy after a conversation and not fuck that guy because I feel embarrassed that my event was slandered or what have you? So just having Love's Not Colorblind sort of in the back pocket of organizers has been useful in just having the conversation. That's all I really wanted. Like I'm not always expecting like problems to be solved, but at least problems can be discussed and worked around.
Do you feel like there would be anything you might change if you were to write the book now, or do you feel like you had your point and you just put a period on it?
I've considered like revisiting Love's Not Colorblind. And what I realize is that like every personal story in that book, every analogy that I use in that book, I could probably replace entirely. I could replace it with something that's happened in the years since the book is released. So like a lot of it still exists from like a societal place, maybe less so from a polyamorous space, only because the book exists in that space and some people have taken it to heart. The only reason why I probably wouldn't go back to Love's Not Colorblind to change anything is because I haven't read the next one yet. I haven't read the next one that takes what I did and just eclipses it. And I'm waiting for Black women to replace it because frankly, it's the reason why I've never expanded past Love's Not Colorblind. Like, it was suggested to me that I turn it into Life's Not Colorblind. And I'm like, there are Black women who have written better books than I am capable of already. So, I'm good with Love's Not Colorblind standing up until like Gab Alexa or somebody writes a better version of it because like that's coming. Or, Michelle High over at Polyamorous While Asian. Like I don't know if she's working on a better book, but she's got one in her. So, who knows?
Yeah, we had her. She was our last guest on the first season. And I agree 100%. She's got one.
Word.
It's in there.
Word. No, she's incredible.
So we mentioned at the start, and I think, some listeners who might be familiar with Love's Not Colorblind might not be aware that you've also published a series of polyamorous superhero novels. And the most recently, I think, was For Hire Supercell in 2021.
Yeah, Supercell 2021. Yeah.
And you're currently working on 4 and 5, apparently. So I just kind of wanted to ask, like, was there something specific about superheroes that you felt was a story setting that was particularly suited to telling stories featuring non-monogamy? Or was it kind of the other way around where there was just, you love superheroes and you were going to naturally include polyamory because it is just a part of your life, part of your lived experience?
So I was writing Love's Not Colorblind, and I ended up watching the San Junipero episode of Black Mirror. If you're unaware, Black Mirror is an anthology show. It's basically the Twilight Zone with technology. And San Junipero was a famous episode that won a bunch of awards because because most of the episodes of Black Mirror are really mind bendy and to the point of mind fuckery. Whereas San Junipero is actually really sweet and really queer and really endearing. It's a great episode. And so it gave me the idea of two young women who bond over their love of technology. And it turned into a book longer than Love's Not Colorblind in like half the time. And when I showed it to Alana Phelan, she was like, "This is garbage, Kev.
Oh no.
This isn't readable as a book." And so she jumped on as a co-writer and she helped me take me banging superhero action figures together and turn it into like actual readable prose.
When you started writing the first one at the same time as writing Love's Not Colorblind, with this being like a lighthearted or an action sci-fi story, and then the other book being quite, heavy, what was that experience like of writing both at the same time?
I mean, I needed the break. I needed the break. Like Love's Not Colorblind brought up so many different stories of hard times, like of racism, of white supremacy. Just I needed a break to write something that was fun, and For Hire sort of became that. It became like the universe that I would live in my head when I was like, waiting for the train. It just became the thing that was going on in my head. It became something fun to write about.
Did those things feel tied as more than just like a fun escape? Did it also feel like the themes that you were exploring in one could be explored in the other?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. The superhero universe that we do with For Hire, it's based on the idea that superheroism is tied to social service as well. Like from the very first superhero in the universe, the city says, "Hey, wow, you have superpowers? Can you be our superhero?" And he's like, "Sure, if you get these racist white cops off the streets, I can be part of what keeps your streets safe from that point forward." So like the superheroes are essentially super cops in a world where cops aren't shitty and racist.
Wow, this is a fantasy novel.
Oh.
Right? And that is a world that could exist. That is a world that we have the resources to create, like the whole egoistic altruism of it. There is a world where no one has to starve and no one has to go homeless. That could exist. The resources for that exist. Let me write a story where that does exist, you know? Um, I love sci-fi. Like I'm a big Mass Effect guy. I'm a Star Wars guy. I enjoy Star Trek. Like all of these universes sort of theorize that we're in a world beyond oppression. Like Star Trek in particular, it theorizes that we're in this world that's like beyond, homophobia, that's beyond white supremacy, that's beyond all that stuff. But it never tells you exactly how you get there. And it never explains why, like, if we're in a world past that, why are the protagonists still like cishet white guys? Why can't the protagonist be everybody if we're in a universe where everybody's accepted? And so I wanted to write to that effect as well, where the main characters in the For Hire universe, for three of the books, are a pair of black women, and for the fourth book, it's a pair of black women, but one is a trans woman, one is an older hero who doesn't always, that's not always something that gets a lot of love. People who have been like at it a while.
Hmm.
So when it comes to some of these identity markers, things like the gender and race of characters or the fact that they're practicing polyamory, is this a world where these things just aren't really a big deal, or they're just not, marginalized by society?
Like I wanted to write identities in a way where all of it's less of a big deal. None of it is no deal. Like I didn't want to just be like, okay, here's a utopia where identity is great, but I'm not going to delve deep into telling like really personal stories of oppression because that's not what I want these books to be about. Like one of the fun parts about doing Operator was that there was a love triangle. And in every other story, the conflict is the existence of the love triangle. In Operator, the conflict is that none of the three people can be 100% honest with each other about what's happening in that love triangle. Each of, like in the case of two of them, their secret identities are together, but their actual identities have to pretend they don't know each other, That kind of thing. The conflict isn't that three people are into each other. The conflict is that three people can't be honest about how into each other they are. Or if they're honest, they might not be as into each other about what's happening. That's the conflict. Yeah, this is a problem, but it's not a problem in the same way. It's not a problem because it exists.
I'm wondering, so you were growing up and you're engaging with all of these stories, these narratives, worlds that are more expansive than the one you were living in. And at this point, you've got a pretty cool life going on. You you're writing novels about superheroes, you're polyamorous with a bunch of girlfriends and stuff. What would the young version of you, what would young Kevin think of your life today?
12-year-old Kevin would probably be a little disappointed.
Why?
Why'd you say that?
Because he didn't know what he wanted. That's the long and short of it. Like 12-year-old Kevin would be disappointed. 20-year-old Kevin wouldn't understand. But they were young men who didn't know what they wanted. And that ends up being the case of a lot of us. A lot of us don't know what we want. A lot of us are, it's whatever drives little boys to pull girls' hair to say, I like you. That's something that doesn't go away until you're like 25. The maladjustment of not knowing what you want and not knowing how to express what you want, that doesn't go away until you put a lot of effort into it. And 12-year-old and 20-year-old Kevin hadn't put in the effort to figure out what he wanted and how he wanted to express it. Hell, I didn't really hit my stride understanding the relationships I wanted to be in until I was like 30, until I was already married. And then I was just sort of figuring it out then.
I have an impulse to ask a very can opening question. I'm gonna hold back.
I'm excited.
I'm gonna hold back. No, I'm gonna hold back. I'm not gonna do it. We have like 5 minutes left. I'm not gonna.
Are you sure?
Open up.
Because I'll be concise.
You've piqued his interest.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm telling you, this is a very broad. I'm gonna open up a fucking whatever.
Go on, answer it if you can.
Okay. I think I engage with a lot of content online about trying to engage on topics of masculinity with young men.
Okay.
On that topic, like speaking to this idea of 20-year-old Kevin and 12-year-old Kevin, and like as now the adults in the room who do know what they want, what angle do you feel like we can take as men in our 30s, 40s, right? How do we communicate this to them in a way that makes it appealing, right? That doesn't make us SJW cucks, but actually like, wow, those guys are cool as shit. I want what they have, right? Because I know that I want what I have. And I think that if they truly understood the reality of our lived experience, they'd want it too. But there's something that's like keeping us from getting that to them. And I would just love to get your thoughts on like,
yeah,
what can we do? Like how do we frame this to make it cool?
I'd point out how counterproductive a lot of the bullshit is. Like a lot of the sad boy rhetoric is really, really counterproductive. At some point, my younger kid was just like, Daddy, why you got so many girlfriends, Daddy? And I was like, because I treat them well. That's it. The only reason I'm allowed to date the way that I am, the only reason I'm able to date the way that I do is because the people in my life feel safe, seen, heard, and respected by me. That's it. The second I start treating my partner shitty, they've got options. They've got lots of options. They're gone. If you want the trad wife and your idea is like, well, let me go find the free spirit manic pixie dream girl and like crush her into a cage, that's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. There is somebody out there who wants what you want. You just need to love on that person and treat them with respect and communication, and then you'll get the thing that you want in the way that you want. I have no designs over controlling anybody, and that allows me to be with a lot of people who don't want to be controlled, or people who, do want to be controlled in a very, consensual and
negotiated way.
Very fun way.
You're right. That was very concise.
Yeah, you were very concise, and I'm glad I asked because I had the question hadn't occurred to me before this, but I'm glad I asked. That was a really good.
You are an educator and a dad.
Yeah. So. You are an educator and a writer and a rad dad.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is awesome. This was so great.
Thank you so much. We would love to invite you to share more about your projects, as well as where people can find you online if they want to hear and see more.
Yeah, I'm Poly Role Models on everything. I've been using Poly Role Models. Even though I don't run the blog anymore, I've been at Poly Role Models on all brands of social media. My website is kevinapatterson.com. I sell the books there. I sell the books on the paperbacks get sold on Amazon because that's where they're self-published through. Love's Not Colorblind is available everywhere that books are sold, and the ebooks for the For Hire series are available anywhere ebooks are sold.
Awesome. And as always, if you're looking for more polyamory content, Genevieve is on TikTok and Instagram at Chill Polyamory. as well as on YouTube at Chill Polyamory, where she discusses non-monogamy in film and TV.
So you can support those projects and this podcast directly on Patreon, where you'll get early access to videos, private stories, live Q&As, an option for one-on-one peer support, and more. So that's patreon.com/chillpolyamory.
This has been I Could Never, and for everyone listening, remember that just because you've never done something before doesn't mean you can't do it. Bye!
Bye!